Hey, before we jump into today's episode, I would like to talk about our sponsor. That's right, we have a sponsor now. Our sponsor is Anchor. Anchor is a service that allows you to get your podcast on multiple platforms, such as Spotify, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, and many others. Anchor also allows you to edit and record your podcast from your phone. Anchor offers a way to edit your podcast through their app and website. Also, with Anchor, on top of getting your podcast heard, you can also get paid with no minimum audience. So, if you have a podcast and would like to get yourself out there, feel free to go to anchor.fm or download Anchor's free app today. Welcome, everybody, to episode 3 of What Goes Bump in the Night. As you heard from our intro, we now have a sponsor. Our sponsor is Anchor. Joe, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing just fine, man. Yourself?
I'm doing pretty solid. Any interesting stuff happened to you over the week?
Really, the only thing I got was that I accidentally showed up to work 2.5 hours early, and when the main meat cutter that we got there, I got new glasses because my other one snapped in half. I was trying to clean them, and they just broke, and I'm like, well, that sucks. So I had to use my backup glasses, and first time I'm actually wearing them, the last time I wore them was closing, so this is the first time opening. This man looked me dead in the face and asked me when did I start wearing glasses. And I'm just like, excuse me? Every time you see me, I wear glasses. Because I'm blind.
Because I'm blind.
So that's pretty much all I got.
That's fair. Genuinely, the only interesting thing that happened to me this week was the fact that we got on Spotify and a bunch of other platforms. We're on Google Podcast, Spotify, this other radio thing that Anchor put us onto. So anyone who is listening to this podcast, you'll be able to hear it on Spotify as well as our first 2 episodes. So that's pretty interesting. It's pretty cool. But we're going to go ahead and jump right on into episode 3. This episode's actually completely different. So for this episode, we're going to be talking about our first serial killer. We're going to be talking about Jeffrey Dahmer. Are you excited to talk about Jeffrey Dahmer, Joe?
I am actually really excited. That sounded really weird, but we're gonna ignore that. Anywho, I am actually really excited to talk about Jeffrey Dahmer. My mom was one of those weird people that had a really big book on serial killers when she was a teenager, because why not? I guess it was the 90s. So, and Jeffrey Dahmer was one of the outliers that always stood out. It was the two of them were Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer, mostly because they were in the Midwestern area. Jeffrey Dahmer was born in Milwaukee, so hence the name the Milwaukee Cannibal and the Milwaukee Monster. But that's just in Wisconsin. It's literally 4 hours from me.
But let's go ahead and jump right into it. We're going to start off with the introduction to Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was an American serial killer who took the lives of 17 males between 1978 and 1991. Over the course of more than 13 years, Dahmer sought out men, mostly African American, at gay bars, malls, and bus stops. He lured them home with promises of money or sex and gave them alcohol laced with drugs before strangling them to death, and he would then engage with sexual acts with the corpses before dismembering them and disposing of them, often keeping their skulls or genitalia as a souvenir. He frequently took photos of these victims at various stages of the murder process so he could recollect each act afterward and relive the experience. Dahmer was captured in 1991 and was sentenced to 16 life terms, where he was killed by fellow prison inmate Christopher Scarver in 1994. In Dahmer's early life, he was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on May 21st, 1960, to Lionel and Joyce Dahmer. Now, this is a little note I put in, but I thought it was sad for his dad to give him his first name as his middle name. Yeah. Because it's as soon as you hear your son's a serial killer, it's got to be a little bit of a bother to be oh no, my name's on the news now.
Yeah, oh no.
I've made a mistake.
Yeah.
But he was described as an energetic and happy child until the age of 4, when a surgery to correct a double hernia seemed to affect a change in the boy. I also looked up what double hernia is. It's basically just a hernia on both sides of the both sides of the groin. And I guess that completely changed him. It made him noticeably subdued, and he became increasingly withdrawn following the birth of his younger brother and his family's frequent moving. By his early teens, he was disengaged and tense and largely friendless. Dahmer claims that his compulations toward necrophilia and murder began around the age of 14. But it appears that the breakdown of his parents' marriage and their divorce a few years later may have been the catalyst for turning these thoughts into actions. By the time of his first killing, Dahmer's alcohol consumption had spun out of control. He dropped out of Ohio State University after 1/4 term, and his recent remarried father insists that he join the army. Dahmer enlisted in late December 1978 and was posted to Germany shortly thereafter. His drinking problems persisted, and in early 1981, the army discharged him. German authorities would later investigate possible connections between Dahmer and the murders that took place in the area during that time. It is not believed that he took any more victims while serving in the armed forces. And I realized that while we were talking, Joe, before we started the podcast, you said you had some information on his military stint.
Yeah, he had, when he was over there, he had, I think it said 3 soldiers, or at the very least 2 soldiers had come out, like, during that time and had said that he was raping them. So, like, it says the 2 soldiers had attested to being raped by Dahmer while in the army, and one of them had said that, and this didn't come out until 2010, he had came out and said that Dahmer had repeatedly raped him over a 17-month period while they were both stationed in Germany. And the other soldier believed that Dahmer had drugged and raped him inside an APC, or an armored personnel carrier, in 1979. But from the second soldier's perspective, it only happened once that it's documented. And this continued until 1981, when the military deemed him unsuitable for continued service and he was honorably discharged, which is kind of wild to think about.
Yeah. It was really crazy to think that he was honorably discharged, but in all fairness, none of these things came to light till like the later years.
Yeah, not to mention, like, everything in his military service said, like, he was basically an average or a slightly above average soldier, so he did what he needed to do. He was just doing his thing, so that would qualify him for it.
The thing that we also talked about before we started, I remember you said that when he was at Ohio State University, he had, what was his GPA?
0.45 out of a 4.0.
And I remember when you said that, I was like, wow, he must have been really stupid. I mean, he was smart enough to kill people, and he did all these crazy things, but he must have been really dumb. But after we talked about it, I realized, well, in all fairness, he was drinking like a fish for his entire stint there.
And he was only there for, like 1 semester, and that was it.
Yeah.
And then, or a semester, and then 3 months of a second semester, and then he bombed out. Like, the only thing that he was good at was, it's a class called riflery, which I'm not sure what it is. I'm assuming from context clues it's firing range or something. I don't know. I don't know if they do that in universities. It was the 70s. Who knows? But, and he even got a B- on that, so it wasn't even that great. Everything else completely failed out on.
Which is really crazy to think about because, like I said, like later on when we finally talk about his murders and stuff, it's crazy that this man had all these ideas and knew all these things to do with these bodies and how to like keep it hidden and stuff for as long as he did, but like was really, really bad at school.
Yeah, well, like I said, you'd have to be at least fairly smart to get a medical job, even in the Army, because like they do testing to see where your job goes, and you have to have some, knowledge to be a medical professional, like, even if it's an Army medic, you know what I mean? You have to know things good. If not, they're going to send you to, like, 11 Bravo way, and then you're going to end up like me, just shoot things.
That's fair. I'm going to jump back into the little finishing part that I got.
Yes.
Following his discharge, Dahmer returned home to Ohio, and an arrest later that year for disorderly conduct, prompted his father to send Dahmer to live with his grandmother in Wisconsin. But his alcohol problems continued, and he was arrested the following summer for indecent exposure. He was arrested once again in 1986 when 2 boys accused him of masturbating in front of them, and he received 1-year probationary sentence.
Wow.
Yeah, that's really crazy to think about, that he was just given 1-year probationary sentence for
that,
in front of 2 boys. They don't say the ages, but I know that you were going to cover the section about his victims, so you want to go ahead and jump into that real quick?
Yeah, of course. So Dahmer's victims in general, like spanning from 78 to 91, consisted of 17 men, And he was careful to select the victims from on the hinge of society, so they were like outcasts, or like they were not like in large groups, kind of like how he was throughout high school, who were often outcasts or borderline criminals, making their disappearances less noticeable, reducing the likelihood of his capture. He lured them to his home with promises of money or sex or drugs, alcohol, so on and so forth. Then strangled them to death. He engaged in sexual acts with their bodies and kept body parts and photos as souvenirs.
Which is the creepiest part about the whole thing, is that after he did these terrible, terrible things to these people, he was like, I'm going to keep part of their body as a reminder that I did these things. It's like, I don't know. Maybe it's just from a normal person's perspective, but I don't think I could ever, if I would ever murder somebody, keep a body part from them. I would be too concerned. I'd feel like I wronged the dead.
It's a trophy type thing. Every majority of major serial killers like this have had kept trophies, basically hunting trophies. It's like, all right, I claimed this one. This is my freaking kill. You know what I mean? And
still crazy.
People have been doing that for years. We just don't do it to humans because naturally people don't try to just off humans.
Murder people, yeah.
But it's just one of those things that majority of serial killers, they do. I don't know why, but they tend to. The first 4 of Dahmer's victims actually occurred right after he graduated high school in June of '78 when he picked up a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks, took him to the home of his parents, and proceeded to get the young man drunk. When Hicks tried to leave, Dahmer killed him by striking him in the head and strangling him with a dumbbell. And it was just like they were hanging out, freaking talking, wanted to drink, and Hicks was like, yeah, we'll do that. And then they got to a certain point that Hicks was trying to go home, and Dahmer didn't want him to. And from what I read earlier, it was like Hicks was just chilling out, sitting by the fire, and then Dahmer just nailed him in the dome with a dumbbell, and it went from there.
That's really, like, scary.
Oh, absolutely. Dahmer then dismembered the corpse of Hicks, packed the body in plastic bags, and buried them. Oh, wow, I didn't even get to that. Because from what I gathered, it was after he hit Hicks with a dumbbell and then strangled him with the bar of the dumbbell, and then after he got done, he stood over him and masturbated over the body.
Yeah, I read that too. He did that with another victim.
Yeah, he probably did it with a couple of them because he was a weird fracking dude.
Yeah.
But after that, he packed the body parts in plastic bags and buried them behind his parents' home. He later exhumed the remains, crushed the bones with a sledgehammer, and scattered them across the woodland around the house. It wasn't until September of '87 that Dahmer took his second victim. That's actually quite a distance for this.
It really is.
And then, dude's name was Stephen Tuomi? Okay. They checked into a hotel room and drank, and Dahmer eventually awoke to find Tuomi dead with no memory of the previous night's activity. He bought a large suitcase to transport Tuomi's body to his grandmother's basement, where he dismembered and masturbated on the corpse before disposing of the remains. Which is wild to think, because this is like he woke up and he was dead. He didn't even know if he killed him. I mean, context says that, yeah, he killed him, but then he did all the extra nonsense that was probably not necessary. So, I don't know. He kind of boned the dog on that one.
Yeah, it's really crazy because with all the other murders, it sounds to me he remembers them. This is the only murder that I've read, even like throughout my research, that said that he had no recollection of murdering this man.
Like, I mean, going into it, he like invited him to the hotel room, getting him drunk. He had obvious intentions from how the Hicks went, that he had the intention to kill him. He did, but he doesn't even remember doing it. So he could have probably gone off scot-free with that, and like freaking, they could have not claimed that to be his.
Oh yeah,
but, 100%. He kind of did his own thing, and only after Dahmer killed another 2 victims at his grandmother's home did she tire of her grandson's late nights and drunkenness. Because, once again, the freaking alcoholism was dragging everywhere. He was a major alcoholic.
I think it's crazy that he was able to hide these murders so well from his grandmother.
Yeah, because, like, in every one, he was, like, getting people drunk, and he was drinking with them. So, he was hammered when these things were happening.
Exactly. So, it's crazy that he took so much precautions to keep this hidden for as long as he did.
It's in a weird kind of morbid way, it's almost impressive.
No, genuinely, it is impressive. Like, it's not even morbid necessarily, because I mean, it's crazy that all these serial killers were able to hide all of their murders for as long as they did.
What I mean by like the impressive part is because he was intoxicated
Yeah.
when this happened. Like you see other serial killers like John Wayne Gacy or Ted Bundy or even the Night Stalker, they weren't intoxicated, or that I'm aware of at the very least. They were always completely sober and they knew what was going on during the time.
Yeah, no, Dahmer, it's crazy to think that he was completely drunk during all of these like encounters, and the later encounters, it doesn't say that he was consuming alcohol as much. It doesn't really mention how he was an alcoholic later on, but it's still crazy that his first 4 murders, the first 4 victims, he was an alcoholic and was still drinking just every day.
That's
and was
wild.
still able to keep it hidden. Like, it's really impressive but scary.
And still dismember the bodies and do everything they needed to do to get rid of them too.
Exactly.
And it's just like, it's wild. Although she had no knowledge of his other activities, like the murders, of course, she forced him to move out of the premises in 1988. And then, of course, there's his sexual assault charges, which goes back to the 2 soldiers in Germany. September of 89, Dahmer had an extremely lucky escape. The encounter with a 13-year-old Laotian boy resulted in charges of sexual exploitation and second-degree sexual assault for Dahmer. He pleaded guilty, claimed that the boy had appeared much older. While awaiting sentencing for his first sexual assault case, Dahmer again put his grandmother's basement to gruesome use. In March of 89, he lured, drugged, strangled, and sodomized, photographed, dismembered, and disposed of a Anthony Sears, an aspiring model, at his trial for child molestation in May of 89. Dahmer was the model of contrition?
Contrition, yeah.
Arguing eloquently in his own defense about how he had seen the error of his ways and that his arrest marked a turning point in his life. His defense counsel argued that he had needed treatment, not incarceration. And the judge agreed, handing down a 1-year sentence on day release, allowing Dahmer to work at his job during the day and return to prison at night, as well as a 5-year probationary sentence. Years later, in an interview with CNN, Lionel Dahmer stated that he wrote a letter to the court that issued the sentence requesting psychological help before his son's parole. However, Dahmer was granted early release by the judge. After serving only 10 months of his sentence, he briefly lived with his grandma following his release, during which time he does not appear to have added to his body count before moving back to his own apartment. So it seemed that in that time, he was actually kind of like, which makes sense, he was on parole and he was probably being watched and everything else like that. So he didn't kill anybody because he like lay low and everything, and kind of like staying true to the reform, freaking switched his life around nonsense for at least that time period.
Yeah, it's really interesting that he was like, after, going in and being arrested, he was finally like, this is, I'm going to turn my life around. And then he did a complete 180.
Again, he did a whole 360.
Yeah, he was like, oh, I'm gonna be a great person, and I'm gonna give back to my community. I'm gonna stop murdering people, to be getting to his last 13 victims.
Yeah. The last 13, which over the following 2 years, Dahmer's victim count accelerated. In
2 years?
In 2 years, which is wild, because I honestly thought it would expand more than that, because given the time period that he was active as a murderer. But,
yeah.
Nah. Bringing his total count from 4 to 17 in 2 years. That's a lot. He developed rituals as he progressed, experimenting with chemical means to disposal and often consuming the flesh of his victims, which comes the Milwaukee cannibal portion.
Yeah.
Dahmer also attempted crude lobotomies, drilling into victims' skulls while they were still alive and injecting them with muriatic acid, which that's actually pictured in the pop culture reference that he was in, which was Hell Night in American Horror Story Hotel. That wasn't it?
Yeah, it was the Devil's Night, because it's Halloween, and Halloween is known as Devil's Night.
And like the freaking dude that they had brought up, like even in that, like they pictured Dahmer as like a really shy, freaking reserved individual that was like really pervy, because he was kind of like perving on the main character a little bit. But then they brought in that dude, and he put a drill to his head, and it was just like, all right.
Yeah, they did a pretty solid job, I'll admit, of recreating him. Yeah, and even while doing this research, I watched one of the interviews with the guy who played him for that role, and he talked about how it was so hard to really get into the mindset of Dahmer, because he would be in a place that he wasn't comfortable. Right. And so he was like, I wanted him to seem reserved.
That's wild. I wonder what the The dude that was like how he freaking dealt with it. The dude that played him in the movie Dahmer.
Yeah. We'll cover those pop culture references here soon, though. Like, we only got a little bit more to cover before we jump into those.
Yeah. So on the 27th of May in 91, Dahmer's neighbor Sandra Smith called the police to report an Asian boy was running naked in the street. Interesting. When the police arrived, the boy was incoherent and they accepted the word of Dahmer, a white man in a largely poor African American community, that the boy was his 19-year-old lover. In fact, the boy was 14 years old and the brother of a Laotian teen Dahmer had molested 3 years earlier. Wow, keeping it in the family. The police escorted Dahmer and the boy home. Clearly not wishing to become embroiled in a homosexual domestic disturbance, they took only a cursory look around before leaving.
They walked in, they probably just did a quick glance.
That's exactly what happened. It says they took only a cursory look around before leaving. That's all they did. They just like, okay, yeah, cool.
It was crazy to think about how they just looked a little harder. They would have found pictures and all kinds of crazy things, man.
And then it even says that once the cops left, Dahmer killed the kid and proceeded with his usual rituals. As they conducted even a basic search, police officers, or like had they conducted a basic search, they would have found the body of Dahmer's 12th victim, Tony Hughes. Before he was finally arrested, Dahmer killed 4 more men.
We're going to go ahead and jump into the scene at Dahmer's house after he was finally, found out. So, Dahmer's killing spree came to an end when he was arrested on July 22nd, 1991. The body parts found in Dahmer's refrigerator and Polaroid photographs of his victims became largely associated with his notorious killing spree. 2 Milwaukee police officers were led to Dahmer when they picked up Tracy Edwards, a 32-year-old African-American man who was wandering the streets with handcuffs dangling from his wrist. They decided to investigate the man's claims that a weird dude had drugged and restrained him. They arrived at Dahmer's apartment, where he calmly offered to get the keys for the handcuffs, which should have been a red flag to start with.
Absolutely. It's like, why do you have the keys to these? Confused.
Yeah, why do you have the keys to these handcuffs that this man's in, and why do you fit the description of the guy he was talking about? But Edwards had claimed that the knife that Dahmer had threatened him with was in the bedroom, and when the officers went in to corroborate the story, he noticed Polaroid photographs of dismembered bodies lying around, and Dahmer was then subdued by the police officers, and a subsequent search revealed a head in the refrigerator, 3 more in the freezer, and a catalog of horrors including preserved skulls, jars containing genitalia, and an extensive gallery of macabre Polaroid photographs of his victims. In 1996, following Dahmer's death, a group of Milwaukee businessmen raised more than $400,000 to purchase the items that he used for his victims, including blades, saws, handcuffs, and the refrigerator to store the body parts. They promptly destroyed them in an effort to distance the city from the horrors of Dahmer's actions and the ensuing media circus surrounding his trial. So they tried their best to pretend like this never happened, essentially. I understand why they would do that,
Oh,
though.
absolutely. If they get a bad stigma like that, you're going to lose freaking businesses, you're going to lose tourists, you're going to lose a lot of things. And
Exactly.
Milwaukee is a huge industrial area. Like, Harley-Davidson is out of Milwaukee. There's breweries out of Milwaukee. Like, there's a lot of things that go in there that would need, like, the income of tourists and other things. And to think that, hey, there was this guy who lived here that killed, molested, and ate people. It's like, you know what, I don't want to go there. I don't go anywhere near there.
That's not exactly a touristy exhibit. But we're going to go ahead and jump into the trials. His trials began on January 1992. Given that the majority of Dahmer's victims were African American, there were a considerable amount of racial tensions. So, strict security precautions were taken, including an 8-foot barrier of bulletproof glass that separated him from the gallery. The inclusion of only one African American on the jury provoked further unrest, but was ultimately contained and short-lived. Lionel Dahmer and his second wife attended the trial throughout. Dahmer initially pled not guilty to all charges, despite having confessed to the killings during the police interrogation. He eventually changed his plea to guilty by virtue of insanity. His defense then offered the gruesome details and behaviors as proof that only someone insane could commit such terrible acts. The jury chose to believe the prosecution's assertion that Dahmer was fully aware of the acts that he committed and chose to commit them anyway. On February 15, 1992, they returned after approximately 10 hours of deliberation. to find him guilty, but sane. On all counts, he was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms in prison, with a 16th tacked on in May. Dahmer reportedly adjusted well to prison life, although he was initially kept apart from the general population. He eventually convinced authorities to allow him to integrate more fully with other inmates. He found religion in the form of books and photos sent to him by his father, and he was granted permission by the Columbia Correctional Institution to be baptized by a local pastor. Well, this part of the story is the most interesting part to me because I just think it's almost kind of like retribution with his death.
Absolutely.
Dahmer was killed on November 28th, 1994 by his fellow prison inmate Christopher Scarver. In accordance with his inclusion in regular work details, Dahmer was assigned to work with 2 other convicted murderers, Scarver and Jesse Anderson. After they had been left alone to complete their task, guards returned to find Scarver had brutally beaten both men with a metal bar from the prison weight room. Dahmer was pronounced dead after approximately 1 hour. Anderson succumbed to his injuries later that day. In 2015, Scarver spoke to the New York Post about his reason for killing Dahmer. Scarver alleged that he was disturbed not only by Dahmer's crimes, but by a habit Dahmer had developed of fashioning severed limbs from prison food to antagonize other inmates. After being taunted by Dahmer and Anderson during their work detail, Scarver said that he confronted Dahmer about his crimes before beating the 2 men to death. He also claimed that prison guards allowed the murder to happen by leaving them alone. Now, I think that's retribution.
Oh, absolutely. But, like, he fashioned severed limbs from prison food.
Yeah, it didn't give me a lot of details on that little section about how he fastened limbs, but I'm assuming he used like the food and like made it look like an arm or something and be like look at Scarver and be like it's your
Scarver was
arm.
just like, no, I don't like that guy, and just beat him to death.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah, he's like, no, I'm not a fan of what you did, which makes sense, like you freaking there's a lot of sexual assault and freaking rape and murder, of like generally like dudes that aren't that old, like mid to late teens usually.
I think it's retribution because a predominant amount of his victims were African American, or a minority of some sort. So it's almost perfect that he was murdered by a black man. A last little tidbit of information before we jump into pop culture is in August 2012, nearly 2 decades after his death was reported, Dahmer's childhood home in Bath, Ohio, where he committed his first murder in 1978 and buried his first victim's remains, was on the market. Its owner, musician Chris Butler, stated that the property would make a great home as long as the buyer could get past the horror factor. In March 2016, Butler put the house up for rent for $8,000 for the week of the Republican National Convention. As of July 2017, the house was no longer on the market, according to Zillow.com. And I think that's interesting, that they were able to sell that home.
That's like the same thing with John Wayne Gacy's house. They turned it into a museum. I was actually planning on taking a friend there later this year, but then some nonsense happened and we never got to go.
That's really crazy, honestly. But I would like to go see that.
Yeah, it's like, I'm not sure where it's at. It's up north. Like Chicago area.
Whenever I make the trip to Illinois, I think it'd be really cool to go see that. Because next season, or later on in this season, we might be covering John Wayne Gacy. Who knows?
Who knows?
But let's go ahead and jump into the pop culture references. You mentioned one at the beginning. My Friend Dahmer, wasn't it?
Yep.
Did you get any information about that other than just like...
The only thing that I know about it was the only individual that would consider himself a friend of Jeffrey Dahmer when he was in high school. Like, he had made a comic, like, in the late 90s or something like that. It was shortly following Dahmer's death and his conviction and stuff. He made a comic, and then later on they like made a movie deal that was in 2017 about like the pre-killing teen years and basically leading up to his first murder. From what I gathered, I haven't personally seen it, though I was really wanting to. But it was based off the graphic novel by Durf McBeck, which is just a goofy name, but it's there. So.
Yeah, I would say I never got to look at that book, but I think it'd be interesting to read the graphic novel and to see the movies, because for books I have the Jeffrey Dahmer story, An American Nightmare by Donald A. Davis, which was published just a few months after Dahmer's arrest in November 1991. The Shrine of Jeffrey Dahmer by Brian Masters, which was published in 1993. And then I have the films, which is Dahmer, a 2002 biographical film starring Jeremy Renner, the Jeffrey Dahmer Files, a 2012 documentary covering the summer of Dahmer's 1991 arrest. Then there's the My Friend Dahmer. And Dahmer, we talked about how he made an appearance in American Horror Story. It was season 5, Hotel. He appears alongside several other serial killers, including John Wayne Gacy.
The Night Stalker. I don't remember his name.
The Night Stalker.
Ricky Rodriguez, I think, as it was.
I thought it was Ricky Ramirez, but
yeah, Ricky Ramirez. You're right. It was Ricky Ramirez, and then
Eileen Worrell as well.
Eileen Wuornos.
And
then of course the dude in the 20s that built the hotel, which is an actual guy. Like, after I watched that, I looked it up, and that dude was real, and he actually made a building that was specifically for killing people. Because the 20s was a wild time.
I think my favorite pop culture reference to Jeffrey Dahmer is the fact that he appeared on South Park on the episode Hell on Earth, which is an episode for Satan's birthday, where he appears alongside John Wayne Gacy and Ted Bundy in a Three Stooges themed section of the episode, where they go get Satan a Ferrari cake, and they end up messing it up and killing each other, and Satan has to get, I think it's a Camry cake, and it's really funny because he's like, oh man, I asked for a Ferrari, I can't invite Neo here with a Camry, and I just think that's like the funniest thing, because they took this serious murderer, the serious serial killer, along with 2 others, and just made them a joke.
That's what South Park does, man. It's what they do best.
I mean, it helps. It helps make it less terrifying when you think about it. Yeah, less grim. But that's all the information I have on Jeffrey Dahmer. Is there anything I missed, or is there anything you think you missed that we could throw in real quick?
That's all I got too, man.
All right, solid. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks. See you next time. Freaking subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the like button, and have a wonderful day.
Hey everybody, thank you for tuning in to another episode of What Goes Bump in the Night. If you liked what you saw, go ahead and leave us a like and subscribe if you want more.